don't even know why I'm back.
Clay is
we're
back
already
because
at
he
it.
can't resist bold. Just
Yeah.
like you can't. Morning, everybody. I'm Carrie Sheffield. Welcome back to Bold TV, and welcome back, Clay Aiken. Back here.
I decided to come back on a slow week because I figured, the news has just been overwhelming the past few weeks. So I'd come back this week when nothing was going on.
You know what? I think pretty much every week for the rest of the Trump presidency will be
2.5 more years, we can handle it.
7 years. So we got a great show today. Melania Trump's immigration lawyer is coming on. Michael Wilds, you don't want to miss it. We're going to talk about DACA and a lot more. There's also
You think that's on his business card, Melania Trump's immigration lawyer? I think he's Michael Wilds' immigration lawyer, who happens to also be Melania Trump's immigration lawyer. I don't think it's on his shingle.
That's fair. And also his father actually was the immigration lawyer for Ringo, I believe, or one of the Beatles.
And it's in the family.
Fascinating. It's in the blood. We've also got Malcolm X's daughter coming up on the show as well. So, and I'm sure she has that on her business card. So at any rate, we want you to be part of the show too. So make sure to add your comments, questions. We're going to throw them to our guests. And speaking of guests, let's welcome our first guest here to the show. For his first time debut on the show, Mr. Brian Brenberg. He is the business and finance chair at the King's College in New York City.
And we have a whole list of things to talk to him about.
Yes.
We have spent the last 15 minutes talking about completely different stuff. I'll go ahead and do what I'm supposed to do, and we'll talk about what you came for.
His expertise.
Expertise. A big part of the news this week. I know I pretended it was a slow news week, but clearly it wasn't. Several things in the business world happened this week.
Yeah.
We saw Gary Cohn leave the administration, and a lot of people assume that has something to do with President Trump's new tariffs that he's imposed on steel and aluminum. Some of the tariffs have changed. Some of his rhetoric has changed a little bit in the past few days about how strict he's going to be. But fill us in on what he said yesterday was going to be what happens.
Well, so go to Gary Cohn first. The reason Gary Cohn is out is because these tariffs are in. There's just no question about that. That's clear as day. They can deny it all they want. That's why he's out. Look, the tariffs from the beginning, President Trump has said, I want to put tariffs on foreign products, particularly steel and aluminum, because I think they're ruining the U.S. economy. And he's come out pretty hard on that the past few weeks. He made a surprise announcement this past week ago saying, we're going to do this. He came back yesterday and he said, we're going to do it, but we're going to create some exemptions for Canada, for Mexico, for other countries who are allies if they make some concessions on trade. So you're seeing the deal-making president. This is what he likes to do. He goes big with the threat. He comes back. He pulls it back a little bit, creates a path forward. But Cohn left because the restrictionists, the trade protectionists in the White House have the upper hand. They know what they want to do, and they've got the president's ear.
But he's got a lot of resistance from not just Democrats, but Republicans in Congress, too, who are against these tariffs. Why? I mean, I have my opinions. You probably have some as well. But tell me why Republicans feel this is not a good idea.
Well, look, Republicans have historically been the party that supports free trade. And the reason is because they think tariffs create lots of unintended consequences. Look, everybody in this country wants to help people in steel and aluminum. We want to see those industries thrive. But here's the problem, and Republicans know this, and this is why they're against the tariffs. When you put a tariff on steel and aluminum, what ends up happening is you raise costs for companies that use steel and aluminum to make their products. You've got about 900,000 people in this country who are in the steel fabricating professions. When you raise the cost of their products, those guys can't compete on an international scale. They maybe can't compete in a domestic market. That's going to kill jobs. It's going to kill more jobs than it's probably going to save or create in steel or aluminum.
But here's my question.
You're going to support him.
Is he? No, so I'm trying to wrap my head around what Trump is doing here. Because so I used to work at Moody's. Moody's put out a report saying this will have basically a negligible effect on the overall GDP of the U.S. because steel and aluminum exports, imports, overall, it's pretty minor. So is he using this as a sort of shot across the bow to get something more substantive from China? Because China, like the Wall Street Journal was reporting on intellectual property theft, for example, estimated between 230 to almost 600 billion per year of intellectual property theft. So is he using this to say, look, you think like the days of Mr. Nice Guy they're over? I mean, is that what he's doing? That's the most generous thing I'm trying to understand.
I think a little bit. I think this is political, though. What he ran on the fact that he's remembering people in this country who have seen their livelihood change significantly over the past 30 years because of globalization and automation. That was the population he spoke to, and this is meant to be a tangible sign to them that he cares about them.
Yeah, but is it going to help? I mean, he talked about
that's the point
he talked about
Republicans
bringing
make.
coal back. I mean, I think most people kind of admit that we're not going to be mining for coal in the way we used to.
No.
And is this not just another example of sort of lip service still? I mean, it's not really going to do it. So help me understand.
No.
If it's a steel tariff, if it's a steel tariff,
Peter
You can have one of those too.
We don't want Peter
Talk about that next.
if it's a steel tariff or an aluminum tariff, it's just a tariff on the actual
It's a tax.
steel, but it's only on that particular material coming in, not on manufactured items that include steel, correct?
Could be on both. It could be on finished product steel. It could be raw material.
We don't know
It
that
depends how they set that. You're right, though. You're actually making the Republican argument. The reason Republicans are against this is because they're saying it's not going to help as many people in Indiana,
But let's not-
wait,
Pennsylvania.
Hold on a second.
Let's not
As the
imply that
president-
anti-tariffs are a Democratic position necessarily. I mean, in this case, they aren't,
Yes.
because
No,
this
Clay.
is not the type
Clay,
of
you
this
set me
is
up
not the
perfectly.
type this is not the type of tariff that Bernie Sanders would be in support of. There are tariffs that I think Democrats would be in support of. This particular type is not one of
Well,
them.
there are also tariffs that Republicans are in support of, including George W. Bush, who put tariffs on steel in 2002 through 2003. And let's not forget the price controls of Richard Nixon, who tried to micromanage the economy through price controls. And the other irony, and look, everybody, if you watch the show, you know I am a Paul Ryan girl. But Paul Ryan, I got a clip when I was on CNN International earlier. We can roll this clip about his position on the border adjustment tax, which is basically the same thing as a tariff.
Yeah. We're going to roll the clip?
Let's
Yeah.
watch the clip. Or not.
Or not.
So, but no, what's his issue?
Anyway,
tell me
the
what he
point
says.
is, okay, so
I don't know what a border adjustment tax is.
Oh, okay.
This is my.
So, Paul Ryan, earlier in the first year of Trump's administration, said he supported a border adjustment tax, i.e., he wanted to tax imports coming in. In my opinion, it's the same thing as a tariff. And so it's intellectually inconsistent for now, Speaker Ryan, to say, oh, and we've got the clip. Do we have the clip? Yes? Okay, we don't.
If I'm-
Anyway, what I
That's
said
just
in the
killing
clip
me.
was that basically the border adjustment tax is for all goods, whereas what Trump is saying, I only want it for steel and aluminum, which is a much smaller sliver of the economy. So I find it intellectually inconsistent for now, Speaker Ryan, to play the virtuous Republican free trader.
I think Ryan would come back and say that one of the reasons I really wanted that tax is because I wanted to pay for something that I really value, and that is tax reform, right? That was how the Republicans were going to pay for tax reform with the border adjustment tax. Now you've got tax reform through, you have the economy kicking along just a little bit more quickly, and you have these tariffs coming in. And Republicans are saying this might actually kill the economic momentum that we're seeing, and we don't want that for the 2018 election because that's what we're running on.
Okay, so Congress gave the president the authority several times in the past century to impose tariffs, sort of unilaterally, to do what he or she wanted to do unilaterally with tariffs. Republicans are not thrilled with these. Democrats are more than happy to do anything to block Trump's authority on anything. Do you think Congress will step in and stop this?
Some will try. The problem is you need a 2/3 majority in the Senate in order to get a veto-proof bill that prevents the president from going forward with these tariffs. So it's going to take it's a very high bar.
You think Trump
if Congress came back and said we're not going to allow you to do this, but we need your signature, the president's going to say no way. This is his issue.
That's only what, 15 Republicans in order to do that. He gets
Well, but it's also every Democrat from
Trust me,
You've gotta
every
get-
Democrat will be happy to say no.
but are you talking about like Heidi Heitkamp or Joe Manchin and the Democrats from blue
If you got 15,
states?
if you got
I don't
15
know.
Republicans voting for something, Heidi Heitkamp will get on
I think Democrats are very happy to see Republican infighting from here until the end of the time, and they see it right now, and they just want to let this mess continue. And I don't think they're going to step in one way or another to help it out in any way.
I'll co-sign
I'm not
that.
saying they should do
I'll
that. I'm just
co-sign
saying
that.
if you're thinking
I don't think
strategy,
they should
that's what
either,
they're
but
doing.
That's probably what they would do. I really want to talk. We're not going to have time to talk about something that I want to talk about, but we'll come back if you would, please, because I want to talk about this article that was in the New York Times a few weeks ago before I had to leave town about Google and some of these larger tech companies who are having who are starting to have so much control. You can check it out, New York Times Magazine, if you get a chance. There'll be a link to it on bold.global to prep work for the next time we have Brian
I
back.
think you're too worried about it. We can talk about it next
Good.
time.
Well, I'm going to come full conspiracy theorist next time you're here. Brian Brenberg, thank you very much for joining us.
Good to be here.
Appreciate it.
Yep.
Yes. We could talk with him for many more minutes.
He's a brilliant guy. That's
We're glad
fellow
he's-
Kennedy School grad.
Oh,
I
Lord.
must
Let me
say.
get that name for you.
Sorry,
Hold on.
I can't help it. It's just a great school. Anyway, okay, we're gonna move on. We got Michael Wilds, managing partner at Wilds and Weinberg, and the immigration lawyer for Melania Trump.
Who happens to be immigration lawyer for many celebrity names, actually, not just Melania Trump. He works in that in the world of I guess what are they P1 visas maybe? We'll ask him. We'll ask him. Michael Wilds, thank you so much for joining us.
Pleasure, Clay. How are you, Carrie? Long time no see.
I know. Good to see you again. Great setup there. I like your flag.
Thank you.
So,
Just happened to have one lying around.
So give us a little bit of an idea of what I think I'm a person who thinks this is a story that, it's a liberal fever dream to worry about this particularly, but it is important to consider the fact that a president who has been strongly outspoken against lots of types of immigration has family members who have benefited from the U.S. immigration process. But this might not be as big a story as I think some people would like to make it out to be. What do you think is the biggest misunderstanding people have about the First Lady's immigration process?
Well, first, I think that she is a First Lady of the First Order. There's a real sense that I have, having gotten to know her and her family, that there's an elegance and a real sense of humility from where she hails. And in the biblical sense, if you follow the book of Esther, you would understand that there's only two First Ladies that were immigrants. Mrs. Trump happens to be the second one. And she has the ear of the president. She's a Jew, too, as if in the Bible. So it's a very important opportunity for America to appreciate the legacy that our founding fathers had in the first family itself. And I've had the privilege for years now to work on behalf of Miss Universe, Trump models, and a lot of the family members through the years, despite being an ardent and very proud Democrat. And I've made it clear that I was a Hillary supporter, and I'm a former elected official. I'm a former mayor in New Jersey myself. I felt that it was important that Mrs. Trump be given an opportunity to express herself and to be given a fair share. She travailed wonderfully through the years. She had
right.
a
Well, let's. We've got the tweet that she put up during the heat of the campaign. Melania tweeted out a letter from you. Let's put that tweet up about what she said. I am pleased to enclose a letter from my immigration attorney which states that with 100% certainty I correctly went through the legal process when arriving in the USA. And that's in response to questions about whether she came here legally or if there was a gray area. But can you talk about that, the visa that she came on in terms of, they call it the Einstein visa. And so people are saying, well, Melania may be beautiful, but, and by the way, my middle name's Esther, so I appreciate that reference. But, she's maybe beautiful, but she's not Einstein.
I mean, in general, just before we get into that, you worked with several other high-profile names: Pele, Bourgeois, Chef Jean-Georges. Your father worked with John Lennon. There is a category of visa, or there are at least two categories, I think, of visas that are talent visas that don't necessarily require a job. They're not necessarily work visas. Correct me if I'm wrong, but they require special talent. I know people in the arts world who have come based on the arts visas. This Einstein visa sort of falls into that same category. Make the defense for why it should be acceptable to let people into the country, even though they don't have a job that they're coming to, just because they have talent or potential for it.
Well, just first, as a political point of order, my father was John Lennon's lawyer when they discovered the whole notion of prosecutorial discretion in the Lennon doctrine that came out of the case when he took on the Nixon administration. So all of DACA kind of evolved on the scholarship of what my dad and a dreamer, John Lennon, had done. Look, I travail in these worlds. We have a merit-based system, believe it or not. We have the O visa, which is for people, aliens of extraordinary ability in the arts, business, science, and athletics. We have the P1 for teams. I've done massive visas lately in the esports world for NBA basketball players. Any kind of talent has a way of finding itself a visa in the United States. And then there's the extraordinary ability. Now, the Einstein nickname in many ways is part of the derogatory dialogue that we see from poor leadership in Washington. We see a beautiful notion of family reunification, workers that will work hard because their family's by their side. They're calling it chain migration, like monkeys walking in a jungle. They're looking at anchor babies. I've never met a woman who will come to America 9 months pregnant to give birth to a child so 21 years later she can get a green card. So, the things have really
agree
gone
with that.
from the ridiculous to the absurd.
And so, Michael, that's what I find so interesting because, I mean, I agree that Melania has extraordinary gifts and she absolutely deserved her visa. But the question is about her family in terms of, they weren't models and they were able to get visas and come into the country. And so I know you disagree with President Trump as it relates to this issue. And I find that very interesting. So do you have tension with the White House because you disagree on the question of chain migration versus merit-based?
No, I have I am a patriot and I will always respect the president of our nation. And again, I do not believe the president to be a bigot. I believe he's well-intended and he's returning on campaign promises. That said, I'm not permitted to talk about the case other than to confirm that Mrs. Trump travailed legally and has citizenship and does not need to adjudicate what was a robust application. She was so eligible for the green card on the extraordinary ability. I want you to know that we've gotten green cards for models and bookers. The booking professionals in the model agencies have gotten.
And I don't think I would disagree, and neither Carrie nor I think many people. I think anybody who's disagreeing that the First Lady handled it the incorrect way. There are very few of those. I guess the question for me, and I, as someone who is staunchly in support of immigration and very much a DACA supporter, is that are we spending too much of our resources on these specific types of visas? Because I happen to love Melania Trump. I know her personally. I do like her a lot, and I think she's clearly the highest rated member of the first family for a reason. People like her, but I'm not going to ask you to defend her specific case, but I will punch back at Carrie a little bit and say, yes, while I love her and while she's certainly been a great First Lady and a wonderful addition to the American fabric as a citizen, is the ability to walk a runway, is the ability to be beautiful and have your photos taken, is that really the type of talent that someone should have in order to be able to get a visa and eventually a green card and eventually become a citizen, as opposed to those folks who come in and actually work in the tech industry, the business industry? I mean, what is the argument for those types of visas?
So our main office is on 53rd and Madison. You'll see over my shoulder a sign with my family name on it, Wilds. That sign was in a dry goods store that my grandfather, my Zadie, had in Pennsylvania. Our entrepreneurial spirit that we have all roots itself on immigration. The greatest experiment in America, the main ingredient, has always been immigration. And whether you are in the technology space, if you're picking blueberries, or you are a fashion model, we want it all. The visas that we have are not walking in cadence with what employers need. The last time we had any kind of revamping was about 30, 40 years ago with President Reagan, where they're punishing employers. And these are the same laws that Fox News and our principal staunch rights supporters are saying, these are the rules on the books, we need to enforce them. Well, there's a new normal now. And punishing employers who are being told to do more with less is wrong. And to answer your question more candidly, a person who travails into America with some talent, look at all the F1 students we have. We're shooting ourselves in the foot to educate people, for them to pay tuition, and then to compete against them because we don't have a way to onboard them into the workforce.
Do you think that those folks who call it hypocrisy, that a administration would support the use of these EB visas, these O visas so staunchly and so defend them so strongly, is not recognizing and appreciating the talents of those who are picking oranges or doing agricultural work? Because that's been a big part of the issue. A lot of the immigrants who are here illegally, a lot of the folks who are trying to come to the U.S., who many agricultural businesses will say we need these workers, are not having the easy road to get here that someone who might be a model or Academy Award winner is having. Is there any hypocrisy in that at all?
So I just want you to understand that the life's blood, and my father, thank God, is 85 years old. You could never tell when he was on the phone if he was talking to a former Beatle or a housekeeper. We've saved scores of marriages by getting the green card for the right housekeeper. And you have not just the blueberries in Georgia that be picked, but every hotel. Our president hails from the development, from a hotel restaurateur background. The bottom line is, You need an inventory of very talented people throughout this nation.
No disagreement, but
Okay.
is it harder
Look,
to
I
get a
need to
visa for
respond to
someone
this.
who's picking a
Well, yeah.
blueberry than it is to get a visa for someone who is a dancer?
Absolutely, absolutely.
And that's, I think, where the
the
problem is.
Well, no, but
dichotomy.
I
Let me
think
tell you
the
from a
argument is
practical
that the reason it's harder is because it is more specialized. It does take a lot more, and whatever you want to say about Melania, the modeling industry is intensely cutthroat and ruthless, and
No,
there's
but
only a
that's
Requires
small
you to be
window.
pretty, but
No,
doesn't require you to pick blueberries.
No, but I'm saying it requires.
Carrie, if I may clarify, the laws only allow people who have a bachelor's degree, extraordinary talent, they're part of a treaty of trade or commerce, or they have some kind of intra-company transfer, the H, the E, the L, the O, the acronym HELLO. Those visas are the hallmark visas. We have historically allowed the Labor Department to rule unskilled laborers, when we know just about every wonderful restaurant throughout our nation cannot exist without their immigrant labor market. I'm not saying that Americans won't work hard, but just take the Filipino community.
Well, what I'm saying is that
area
immigrants
where
drive down
other
the
people's
price of
children.
labor, is what I'm saying, and that's a problem because it drives down wages for citizens. I want to turn, though, really quick, while we still have you, to the debate about California and sanctuary cities. So President Trump going on offense this week, saying he's going to sue California. And also, there was a judge who sided with Trump on the issue of immigration. So what's your take on the president's approach to California that's basically saying it's lawless for a state to go rogue and say, we're not going to enforce the laws that are on the books?
Well, maybe the right segue is for me to show the first portion of the show to the second. We're concerned that immigrants will drive down the cost of living for Americans. Here in the California theater, what we're seeing is the ineptitude of the federal government to do its job. They're expecting on a silver platter the states to forget and say the hell with due process and hand over federal felons. Now, look, I'm a former federal prosecutor, a former mayor, and a father who does not want serious hardened criminals to stay in the United States. But as a measure of principle, we're not going to skirt around this because the federal government is lazy, or they don't have the right resource, or they don't go through the proper protocols. The 10th Amendment protects the state's police interests in making sure they don't get trampled by the federal government. And that said, the preemption doctrine does not allow states, we are the United States of America, to make their own individual mosaic on immigration law. So what's happening because of the deafening silence in Washington is the states are now coming through. We see in the Ninth Circuit an effort to actually recognize that there is a state's interest in immigration, whether it's people who have relatives who want to go to school or for lectures. So this tension that we're seeing is because our elected leaders in Washington are ineffective on the dialogue on immigration. They believe that they're not going to get reelected every 2 years if they look like they're embracing the entrepreneurial spirit of and the economic gain of immigration because they look like they're weak on homeland security. And shame on the media, not you guys, but shame on the media that makes everybody believe that everybody with an accent is a potential criminal. So with this kind of negative,
That's not what the lawsuit's about.
Yeah, but
we'll
okay.
Have to bring you back
I'll
to
tell you
talk
what. We'll
about
have you.
it.
We'll bring you back.
I'll
I will
come
say.
back to it.
I will say at the end that it's always interesting to me that certain people think that states' rights should be paramount until the states want to do something they disagree with. Michael
Let's break
Wiles,
the
thank you
law.
very much for joining us. Thank you. Come back and talk about immigration. Is always a hot topic, so please join us again.
Thank you. Have a good-
They do from immigration to marijuana legalization to LGBT issues that are that states pass laws to protect certain people. States have the rights to do that. States have the rights to make their own laws until they're a law that someone in the Republican Party and the federal government doesn't want them to do. So LGBT issues, let me do the segue. Tick-tick-ting. Okay. James Michael Nichols is here from HuffPost. He's the editor of HuffPost Queer Voices. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you. I'm excited to be here.
Glad you're here. I want to talk a little bit about the Oscars. We'll talk about a whole bunch of different things, but the Oscars had a big... Did you watch them this year?
I never watched them. I
not?
watched little clips on social media.
never
No, I
watched
never
them?
do. I don't.
Okay.
I feel I'm one of those.
One of my very
Red state people who never watches
one of my
them.
very closest
Yeah.
friends got to sing on the Oscars this year. I was so thrilled.
Oh,
She
who
sang
was that?
This Is Me, Ilyasah.
Oh, that was great. I love that.
Who I've done some stuff with before in the past. Got to sing, so I had to watch them this year. I tend to try to watch them most of the time, but I watched the whole thing this year. And I think the Oscars, the Academy made a concerted effort to show as much diversity in all ways as possible. Maya Rudolph and Tiffany Haddish even made a little joke about it a little bit. One of the things that I think didn't necessarily get, maybe from HuffPost Queer Voices it got a lot of attention, but generally didn't, is the amount of LGBTQ representation that there was
that's
this
why
year.
we got your piece up on
that
screen
is.
so our viewers can check it out.
Daniela Vega, the very first transgender actress to ever present on the Academy Awards, the film that she was in, A Fantastic Woman, is that right? Won the Academy Award for Best Foreign Language Film. We had several recipients of Oscars mention their partners on the during their acceptance speeches. It was visible, but to me, I think the reason that it was maybe even more impactful is that it was visible, but not necessarily as talked about. You know, Daniela Vega got some attention, but we didn't see a lot of big attention to the Coco winners who thanked their husband and wife. Do you think that, I mean, what shows more progress? The fact that there has been a lot of representation, or the fact that there was representation without a lot of fury over it?
I think both, right? I mean, I think that the subtle representation is important, but I think also if you look at the diversity in terms of the nominees, we had Jens Ford, the first openly trans person nominated for the director category. That moment you're hitting on with the Coco team, thanking their partners, I think, you know, more subtle representation like that can be impactful and powerful in special ways more than making like a spectacle in a lot of times. You know?
Right, but when Dustin Lance Black won,
Sure.
or when I mean Sean Penn wasn't gay, but Harvey Milk was
Right.
you know, the story. Those got a lot more buzz. But Brokeback Mountain winning got a lot more buzz.
Yeah.
But that came out in 2005,
It's a very different time, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
I feel like a lot has happened since Brokeback Mountain.
No, but I'm saying
Yeah.
the
I think
fact
that's
that we aren't
yeah.
making it the headline
Right.
is to me more progress than the
Right.
fact
Sure.
that it's happening. What are the
Yeah.
big moments for you?
I think you hit on most of the big moments.
Sorry.
No, it's okay. You stepped under a little
Oh,
bit.
it's Thunder Clay.
But I do think that, right, representation kind of always matters. And like those moments she's hitting on were situated in a very specific political climate where maybe that they had more of an impact in a large reaching way. I don't think that debating like what kind of progress is like the most beneficial is useful, but I do think that there was representation in a really specific way this year that I was really proud of as a queer person.
The ratings were down.
Yeah.
I think
And it was the lowest rated. In fact,
although let's not pretend they haven't been considered. Every year has been the
well,
lowest
no,
rated. For
actually,
the last several.
President Trump tweeted about it, and then there was a response.
Yes,
let's
by
put
all means, let's
President
give him a
Trump's
platform
tweet.
again.
Well, no, he said lowest rated Oscars in history. Problem is we don't have stars anymore except your president.
Yeah,
just
yeah.
kidding, of course.
Someone
but I love
added that
the
just kidding
response.
for him.
No, but I love the response. Let's put the tweet in response from Jimmy Kimmel. He said, "Thanks, lowest rated president in history." Whatever about that. However, what Jimmy Kimmel said I thought was very interesting about Netflix, where he said, look, the Super Bowl viewership is down. Any national, huge, really big event like the Oscars or the Emmys or the Super Bowl or what have you, it's being fractured by Netflix. So what's your opinion in terms of why the ratings were the lowest in history?
Yeah, I mean, I think Netflix is part of it. I think the larger conversation is that the things that young people are excited about and young people want to see honored kind of aren't getting that recognition in the Oscar space, right? We had Lady Bird, Call Me By Your Name, Get Out, kind of like not really get a lot of attention at the Oscars. And these kind of identity-based films that really resonate with young people aren't getting the same kind of traction when it comes to specific representation at the Oscars.
But do you really think it's the young folks who aren't watching so much as, I mean, I'll play devil's advocate here for a second.
Sure.
I think that a lot of I would argue, I don't know if we have numbers yet, maybe Carrie loves a number, but I would argue that a lot of the reason that some of these these ratings are dropping isn't necessarily just because young people aren't watching, but because the traditional audience for television that doesn't have Netflix, the older audience, the more conservative audience, is somewhat turned off by the politicization of the Oscars, the fact that while Kimmel wasn't as political as he could have been, as soon as one of my very good friends, Meghan McCain, said she tried to watch it, but as soon as you start talking politics, she turned it off. My mother only watched it because Kayala was singing. She kept texting me saying, I can't stand this. When is she singing? Because I'm ready to turn it off. Is there an argument that the Oscars has become, in its efforts to diversify, become sort of just as marginalizing as some of the news that we have?
I would be very careful with saying just as marginalizing. Hey, look, I would argue that art is always inherently political. Maybe places like the Oscars are just wearing it in a much more front and center way than they have in the past. But I think, all these things can be true. It can be a combination of factors that young people are turned off by what's being honored. Certain people are engaging as an act of protest, and things like that. All these things can be coalescing together.
Do you think that the efforts to diversify diversify, though, are because those in Hollywood are interested in making sure that there is equal representation of women, equal representation of minorities, equal representation of LGBTQ?
Sure.
Or is it because they're worried about the appearance of not being equal? I mean, there is, I think, a difference. A lot of folks in the entertainment industry have certainly talked a big game about equality, but we've seen they're still not paying women equally. They're
Sure.
still not doing a lot of these things. They're still not representing certain minority groups in certain ways. I got to tell you, if I were Latino, I'd be pissed as hell because there's been so much effort to diversify and make sure that other groups are represented.
Yeah.
But there's not been a big effort to make sure that there's equal representation of Latinos in films or Latino. Obviously, we had a director who who was, but. Is it really because of the interest in trying to diversify, or is it because they want to appear that they are being diverse?
Yeah, I mean, I would never claim to speak for how Latino people feel about anything, but I think that...
I don't either. I'm just saying if I was, I'd be pissed.
I would say that progress is a marathon and not a sprint, and that these small benchmarks that we're reaching, they matter. And you had these moments, like Frances McDormand during her speech, kind of calling out a really tangible way for people to be more inclusive in casting and crew decisions surrounding movies and films. And I think moments like that are really inclusion writer, yeah. I think moments like that are really powerful and speak to a larger cultural change that's happening, but I don't think it's going to happen overnight. You know?
So here's my question on the issue of diversity and inclusion, because I'm a big fan of being inclusive, and that's part of why
That's part of why she lets a liberal on the show.
No, and I'm very passionate about making sure we have diversity in business and in society and getting all voices heard,
Sure.
Especially in the conservative movement, being more inclusive. But Shonda Rhimes has on her Instagram, she posted that she thinks in culture and in Hollywood that devout Christian communities are being underrepresented. So when we're talking about representation, she said Christians, I would argue representation of just conservatives overall in Hollywood, that a lot of people, and that's what
In a
Clay
way that's
mentioned.
not the butt of the joke, right?
Exactly, right. And also maybe portraying people from rural states as a redneck, as a dumb hick, et cetera.
Sure.
Do you think that's something that Hollywood should grapple with?
I mean, I'm sensitive to this. I'm from North Carolina as well. You know, I understand. Yeah.
Which part?
Where?
From Raleigh.
Oh, what?
I
Buried the
know.
lead.
All the gay folks are gone now. We're all here.
I was like, should I drop it when I'm on? I don't know. But I mean,
Where'd you go to school?
I went to Leesville.
Shut
Actually.
the
I know.
Sorry about that. When did you graduate? You guys just hang there for a minute.
2008. Yeah, a few years after you.
A few years after. Shit. We went to the same high school.
Yeah.
Aw.
crazy.
Wait, is there a picture of him on the wall, like at the high school?
No,
There
there
should
better not
be.
be.
Maybe now. I
the
mean,
Clay Aiken class, or like
there was a
awards hall.
yeah. I was in middle school when all that was
They
happening.
had that
so,
all
yeah.
got burned. He was in middle school. He was younger than my brother. Okay, we got off track. You're sensitive to that. You understand being from a
Sure.
purple state. I always say purple state.
Okay.
I know we're still a little bit red.
Right.
But from a purple state, that there are communities that, I mean, you understand what I'm talking about with my mom not wanting to watch.
I do, yeah. And I mean, I grew up in a Christian household. I understand the mentality. I will say that historically in this country, the voices that you're trying to hit on, I feel like have gotten representation in a way that the underrepresented communities that we're trying to elevate now haven't gotten.
Right, so
we're
that's my
trying
question
to-
is there a difference between historically versus now, today?
Sure.
Like let's not live in the past.
Sure, but I think we can't look where we're going if we don't look to the past. You know, like we have to be conscious of the way things have always been. That's how we change things, right? So just because we're focusing on these things now doesn't mean that we're completely ignoring these other groups of people. It just means that this is where the conversation needs to be centered right now.
Is there a point when at what level is everything, do we feel like the Oscars, do we feel like the media landscape has reached equality? I mean, it can't be 50-50 LGBT characters and
Sure.
and straight characters, because that's just not what the world looks like. What is that point? Have we gotten there? Are we getting closer to it? Are we never going to be there?
I don't think that there is like a finish line when it comes to equality for different groups of people. And I think that it's an ongoing conversation, an ongoing process. And like for me, when I'm thinking about it, I'm thinking about the work we're engaged in right now.
Doesn't that we're blowing this. We're not going to stop at 11, y'all. Doesn't that though is that not part of, I think, one of the reasons that it becomes more difficult for those who are of the privileged populations to have trouble with wanting to watch the Oscars? Because I feel like at some point, and I'm thinking about my family members who I fight with this all the time. Not my mother, but other family members who I fight about this with all the time, who say, I mean, when are we going to have been good enough? You know, at what point have we?
Yeah,
do we have enough
at what
characters?
point have we atoned
or are we
for our
always going to be
ancestors?
fighting? Well,
I don't think I don't like the word atone.
I don't know if we'll
Yeah.
ever get there.
I mean,
we
like,
did some
I don't
pretty
know.
nasty
Yeah.
shit. But is there not a point where it's going to
Or
become
what point is-
incumbent upon those of us in the LGBT community or those in the African American community or whatever community to say, you know what, progress is being made and we're feeling better.
Yeah, I mean, I think that it's a complicated question, but I think one way to look at it is when you have stories being told in film and television that are representative of all types of people from all types of backgrounds, and when you have the people producing those stories also of a diverse nature when it comes to that. I mean, it's not, the issue fundamentally is that even when we have kind of diverse representation in film, people working on the cast are largely white and male still, and women are facing kind of discrimination in different ways, kind of institutionally in those spaces. So it's about thinking about the systems of power kind of governing these things and how do we change that to actually kind of get to it at the forefront of it. Does that
We
make
could
sense?
talk about this forever.
Yeah.
It does make sense,
Yeah.
but we're going to have you back, not just because it's a fascinating topic for me. Carrie's an advocate and it's fascinating for her too, but because he's from Raleigh. He went to
Hometown
Leesville.
boy.
And how about
don't have an
you know, well, he also is quite a bit younger than I am. They've lost them in their younger years. And I mean, how ironic is it that our school mascot was literally the Pride?
Literally,
the
right?
Pride. We
Oh,
were
like a
funny.
lion pride?
Like
well,
a group
a
of
lion pride for them. For us, it was
No, I
completely
think that's
different.
awesome. No, that's awesome. I love that.
James Michael Nichols, thank you very much.
Yeah.
You can check out his work on HuffPost, Queer Voices, and he'll be back here to talk about this more.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very
I appreciate
much.
it.
Look at that.
I knew you were going
I
to
never see anybody meet anybody from Raleigh, and I never met anybody who went to my high school too. That's pretty impressive.
that?
He's going to have a hall for him one day. I feel like.
Oh.
He definitely will.
Your lips to God's ears.
Okay, now to another group of people who had a lot of progress made, especially a lot of talk being made at the Oscars about women's equality. Frances McDormand had an incredible speech when she accepted the Best Actress Academy Award, talking about the need to make sure that women have access to the same types of things that men have had access to in Hollywood all the time. We're seeing that in politics right now. Women are running for office in numbers that are monumentally large. Who knows? Maybe a sweep, and we'll finally have a 50-50 House. Probably not this year, but somebody who's definitely working to get there. Congressional candidate for the 25th District, Jess Phoenix, and the president of the Women's National Republican Club, Robin Weaver, are both here. Thank you guys for joining us. Women in politics. What
be here. Yeah.
What do you think is the catalyst behind so many women running for office this year?
I have to say, I think a lot of it comes from a reaction to policies that a lot of women feel are kind of counter to their particular interests. Plus, I think there's just a strong sense, regardless of gender, about social justice issues and needing to make decisions that are going to benefit the country as a whole for future generations. So I think it's a very forward-looking thing.
Is that because of, there would be a lot of people who would argue that that's because the current administration has had a lot of press, a lot of news stories that aren't necessarily as friendly to women as past administrations have been.
I would say that, I was just at a high school on Friday, and it was Monday. Monday, I'm losing track of time. But of the high school students, I asked 600 students how many would consider President Trump a role model, and none of them raised their hand. And there were Republican students there. They just saw his behavior as something they didn't want to emulate. And I think that is the problem.
Robin, does that concern Republicans?
You know what? I think both parties have made tremendous strides in terms of women being represented in Congress. And unfortunately, the numbers for Republicans aren't quite as good as they are for Democrats. For example, 33% of Democrats in the House and Senate are women. 9% of Republicans in the House and Senate are women. But there is an organization called Winning for Women that has made tremendous strides in supporting Republican women who are running for Congress and the Senate. As a matter of fact, we're having an event in a few weeks at the club with 5 women, 4 of whom are running for the House, 1 for the Senate. So we're very excited about that. And I have to tell you, as president of the Women's National Republican Club, we were founded in 1921 by suffragettes. And I would like to think they were the original Me Too movement.
Fair enough.
Well, Robin, so Winning for Women, you
Very
mentioned
proud of
the
that,
group.
yes.
I'm involved with them a little bit. I know a number of their candidates. In fact, we've had Claudia Tenney, who was part of the cohort, on our show a couple times. I know they've also got Elise Stefanik, the youngest Republican, or the youngest woman, period, elected to Congress ever, is part of the cohort too with Winning for Women. But I'm also advising another group that's bipartisan to help women get just overall run for Congress or for office at any level. I should connect you with them.
That she should run? Or
No, it's another one. It's actually, they just, I'll tell you more later.
Okay.
But anyway, because they're still kind of in the planning phases. But we were having a call because they have a hard time getting conservative women to work with them. And so I had a planning call with them. And I found it interesting that even the language and how are they thinking about framing to launch the organization, because I was on a planning call on Skype and it was 3 or 4 to 1 liberals with me, and I was like, the language that you're using here to be nonpartisan to get women in general, it's triggering for conservatives. So, and I find it interesting. And so I'd love to get your thoughts just overall about this question of, we talk a lot about feminism, and my friend Karen Agnes, who's a conservative, was just quoting USA Today this week saying it's really hard for a conservative woman nowadays to call themselves a feminist, because that word has been taken over to mean something that is a litmus test around specific issues like abortion or pay issues, et cetera. So, you're running for office in California, which is obviously a very liberal place. So in that
not in my
I was
district.
about to say,
Yeah, not in my
this
district.
might not be as
Right.
much
So
so.
if your
but in
district, so
general.
talk
Tell
us
us
about,
where they are.
yeah,
Tell us
talk
where they
about
are.
your district. Then how would you appeal to women who are maybe conservative in your district who feel that maybe the term feminism has been hijacked by the left?
Well, I would say that, interestingly enough, the definition of feminism as I see it, and I think what a lot of people think it should be, is basically that women should have equal opportunity, equal access to opportunity. There should be equity. And it's not so like one group should be above another. And so I think that is where the intent of it was. And I think it gets kind of shifted. So in my district, it's the northern part of LA County, and it's been forgotten for a long time because it's a bit more rural. I mean, people have livestock and horses. And
Northridge.
Yeah, it's actually not Chatsworth or Northridge. It's even further. It's Simi Valley, Santa Clarita, and then Lancaster and Palmdale.
That's Ventura County, though.
Simi's Ventura. The rest is LA County. So it's mostly LA County. And the numbers have changed. We're now actually more Democratic than Republican for the first time ever. But that, as population shifts and everything too, as California shifts to reflect, the population distributions change. In our district, what I found that what people want more than anything is kind of a step back from the extreme polarization, because we see, it's us versus them. It's, your team, my team. And it really shouldn't be that way. Politics is about incremental compromise, working towards shared goals. And when I talk to people and I say, hey, you want clean air, clean water, clean soil, good education for your kids, we may have different views on how we get there, but if we hold those ideals up and we say, like, this is what matters to us, people are willing to say, look, you know what? Let's talk. How can we do this? How can we each come together to achieve an end goal? So I think that actually really resonates with people.
I had a question for you, but she said something made me want to ask her a follow-up real quick. You talked about clean water, clean air, et cetera. You're one of 5 scientists running for Congress right now.
I have no idea how many are at the moment, but yes.
Not many running for Congress.
Quite a few.
I always talked a lot about having multiple hyphenates and which ones are important and which ones helped me, which ones hurt me. What do you think's more important, more valuable to you as a candidate, being a woman who is we're here in the year, it's International Women's Month, right? But it's also the year of
the woman.
It really is the year of the woman, too. Let's not pretend it didn't. Or being a scientist who comes to the table with, facts about, I'm assuming climate change is an important thing for you.
I studied it.
Environment and whatnot. What's more valuable to you this year and in this district?
Yeah, I think it's evidence-based policymaking, because that's fundamentally what guides me. And I tell everybody, look, if I see the facts and data are pointing in a certain direction, I will follow those facts. And in this era of people saying there is nothing objective, there is no truth, there is no reality, and yes, there is. Yes, there is. And as a scientist, that's what my whole career has been, is in measuring observable things and using analysis to get to better solutions. And so I tell people, look, if you show me evidence that something is different than what my opinion, my belief was, I will follow that evidence and I will actually change my mind. And they say, oh, wow, what a novel idea. And I said, look, a lot of the founding fathers of our country were scientists or scientifically oriented people. So it's part of the fundamental essence of how the country was built.
I've got one for you, but I want to let you go because I keep jumping.
Well, yeah, Ben Franklin. We had Ben Franklin circles last year. But,
we had Ben Franklin on the show,
Yes,
too.
we had him too. Yes. We had
That would be
a live
interesting.
seance. It was
A little
great.
musty.
But I want to just talk a little bit more about Republican women specifically, because I noticed on the Facebook page for Winning for Women when they launched, they were being attacked by some not only male but female conservatives.
Uh-oh, here
by
comes the
saying,
soapbox.
Well, no, they were saying like, why are you focused just on women? This is identity politics. So why are you doing this? So what would you say in response to that? Because I found it very interesting. I was like, well, this explains why Republican women are outnumbered by Democrats 3-1. So do you see a problem where conservatives are saying, let's not specifically help women, let's help all Republican candidates?
Well, I think there is a certain, if you will, Republican dogma that we don't like identity politics. So, we don't necessarily want to say, gee, we want to have X number of African Americans or X number of women. But I think it's also unrealistic for the party as a whole not to look at women, not to look at the African American community, because we need to make inroads there. And I was very proud of the fact that a couple of weeks ago I went up to Harlem and attended an event for Black History Month that was sponsored by the Harlem Republican Club. And I have to tell
All
you,
10 of them.
I have to.
Come on now.
You just took away the number I was going to throw out. There were about 70 people there. It was so impressive. And quite frankly, it was also kind of moving because they all indicated how difficult it is to be a Republican in Harlem. And I think this is something that Republicans have really got to sort of overcome and focus on tapping into the Latino community, tapping into the LGBT community. And I'm very proud of the fact that we had an LGBT panel at the Women's National Republican Club that included the president of the Log Cabin Republicans, one of our members, and a gentleman by the name of Fred Carger, who ran as the first openly gay Republican for president in 2012.
Right.
So I think it is important that we sort of overcome identity politics in some areas, because we have to realize, we want to appeal to everyone.
And it's about winning
And
elections,
that's
right?
exactly right.
So like,
and we can't
if
sort
your
of
identity
Not
is a
for
losing
everybody.
election,
Yeah.
You know what's interesting?
Exactly.
We're going to have to go, but I'm going to a question for both of you to end it. We have people on all the time, and we tend to have people from opposing sides of the aisle at the same table. And one thing that I've noticed today, I think more so than a lot of times when we have people on this side of the table, is that when she's talking, you are listening, which I appreciate. As she was talking about her
I think it's
district.
important that we listen to one another.
No, and
I
I
agree.
think but you gave a shit. It seemed like, you know what I mean, which I appreciate, and I find that maybe potentially Republican women need to continue to push down and kind of dig their heels into the argument / fact truth that women tend to be better at working together than men do, especially in the Republican Party. I mean, Kathy McMorris Rogers is someone who I think has a lot of respect.
I'm a big fan of Kathy's.
in the House. I'm just talking about women on the Republican side because there are a lot of great women on both.
My mom's a Republican, and she was a high-level Bush
I
appointee.
had read that, Jess.
Yeah, oh, yeah, my
Maybe
dad
that's
is
why
too.
she was listening.
homework.
That's why. But you also see Susan Collins, Lisa Murkowski, who I know get a lot of heat from the far right wing of the party, but who are still conservative Republican women, but are willing to kind of actually pay attention to each other. How do Republican women make that argument to their base in primaries? I think even more than anything, and how do both parties kind of sell that truth to the electorate when they're making the argument that you should vote for women? Because, I mean, I'll be one of the first to say that with the exception of one Republican woman who I'm incredibly familiar with because I ran against her, most women are better at working together.
you know what?
than-
That's scientifically proven.
Yeah, 30%.
Quantitatively, communications, verbal
but
skills.
you haven't convinced people of that yet.
But, Republican women care about the same kinds of issues that any other party cares about, whether it's a Democrat or an independent. I
Not
really
quite
think
as
they
much
do.
about party politics as they do about the policies. Would you disagree? I mean, maybe I'm wrong, but I would say that the empirical evidence shows that women are more interested in focusing on the policies they think that are important and will help their constituents than they are about playing the games.
Well, I think that's true to a large extent. And, I'm very proud of the fact that there's a congresswoman from Missouri, Ann Wagner, for example, who's sponsoring a sex trafficking bill. I mean, as a Republican, and I think people would be surprised. They always
Cindy
think
McCain, Republican,
that's exactly
very involved
right.
in sex trafficking.
Yep.
But, I think there are certain fundamental policies that Republicans probably differentiate from in terms of Democrats, and that's basically the size of government. And I think that's probably the overriding issue. So whether you're running as a Republican man or Republican woman, there's a certain consistency about how much of a role you think the federal government should play. And I think once you get beyond that, then it becomes just a matter of really very much similarity.
Right,
Right.
but Jess, wouldn't you rather be? I know we gotta
We
go.
gotta go.
But Jess, wouldn't you rather have the debate with a Republican about the size of government?
Yeah, oh, yeah.
And a debate with the Republican about the
Who gets a
politics
role in
and
it.
who's
Yeah, yeah.
grabbing
Size of
who
something,
by such
some
and
body
such.
part.
Exactly.
Yeah,
Right, exactly. Let's talk substance.
Yes.
Well, good luck to
absolutely.
both of you.
I'm not running.
I may not,
Yeah.
but you're running a lot of, but you're supporting a lot of women. You're supporting a lot
I
of
am
women. So
supporting a
good
lot
luck
of
to
women
both of
and
you.
very proud of
and
that.
I admit, I probably would vote for Jess for her
Thank you.
Republican
Thank
opponent, but that's okay.
I'll
That's
vote for
okay.
her mother.
That's okay. There you go. We disagree to disagree, but I appreciate what you're doing, and I really do. I appreciate what you're doing also, because I think if we can keep it about policy and keep it about listening to people, and listening is, getting along as well as
That's exactly
women
right.
seem to be able to do. I mean, she's a lot feistier than a lot of them, but I wish you both a lot of luck in your respective causes,
you
and
for
we hope
having
you'll
us.
both come back. It's a
Great
long
to
trip
be
for
here
you,
today.
but please
Great
do.
meeting
I know.
Jess and great being here.
Yes,
today.
thank you very much, Jess Phoenix, Robin Weaver. Come back and see us.
I will.
Maybe Jess will come back when she's a congresswoman.
She came back. This is her
I know,
second
it's her
time
second
on the
time
show.
back. Yes.
So she'll have to come back when she is
wins.
elected.
When she wins, she'll come back as a
Or her
congresswoman.
mom can come too.
There you go. Bring them both.
Yes.
There you go.
There we go.
We have We've got a lighthearted show, but we'll make it a little more lighthearted today. Citizen journalist from Comedy Central's The Opposition with Jordan Klepper, Kobi, Libii.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Let's watch a little trailer of you on the show.
Oh, please.
Newsflash, the mainstream media is lying to you. Fake news CNN, second place Fox, Leninist Etsy, two-faced Kathy Postelonic from Glen Oaks, Illinois. Stop the Facebook cat propaganda, Kathy. Some of us are allergic. All the ABC, CBS, MBBB, Boys to Men, BBD, we get it. They have letters. We've got F, A, C, T, S's. So sit down, shut up, and stop obeying. I'm Jordan Klepper, and this is The Opposition.
The Opposition with Jordan Klepper premieres next Monday at 11:30.
Okay,
So-
Kobi, you weren't in that trailer. What happened?
It's okay. We got a joke of him later on. But
Okay, good.
I love the Leninist Etsy. That was the best line.
So the opposition is sort of a send-up of some of the, how would you call them, the more controversial conspiracy theorist-y type
Yeah.
television shows on some far cable news outlets, right?
Alt media on the internet too. Alt media is a term we use. They flirt with the alt-right in some cases. They're not necessarily explicitly the alt-right. We're talking about people like Alex Jones. We're talking about Breitbart. So the way you can think about our show is sort of the Daily Show meets Colbert, but sort of midwifed by Breitbart.
You're a comedian. Have you always been interested in the political stuff?
Yes, I've always been interested in the political stuff, but I definitely got more interested in the political stuff after Trump was elected. There's a sense of urgency that I think a lot of us felt about the way politics was headed in our country, and that sort of pitched me back into political satire in a way that I hadn't been for a few years.
Yeah. Well, let's see one of your jokes. Let's see what you got. Let's roll it.
No pressure.
I hope you got to pick it.
Thank you, Jordan. I'm here to bring attention to an important cause out there, BLM.
Wait, are you talking about Black Lives Matter?
Oh, God, no. I'm not some militant radical. I'm talking about BLM. Black Lives, Manners.
So yeah, you hit on a lot of different themes in your comedy. Race is one of them.
Sure.
You mentioned Breitbart and alt-right issues, of which, Lord knows, the alt-right scares me too. But my question is, do you guys risk by just going against the right, basically further polarizing the country?
You stole my question, girl.
Well, I don't. So I wouldn't. I wouldn't say that we go just against the right. I don't think that's accurate. The characters we play, their worldview is to the right, but we call BS where we see it. And a lot of the responsibility of satirists is to go after the people in power, and the right's in power right now. So more gets focused on that.
Stephen Colbert went after the right when the right wasn't in power, and I would argue that Stephen Colbert and Jon Stewart helped to create Trump.
Oh, interesting.
Okay, well, I wouldn't go that far, but I wouldn't go that far because
I'm excited to hear further.
because of the next question that I'll ask, which is, I don't know that I could. Of course, I don't watch Fox News and see the clips they show, but your audience tends to be of one political persuasion, true or false, right?
Yeah, sure, I believe
so
that. Yeah.
do you think that your show has an impact on moving the needle on, listen, I know a lot of people get their news still from Trevor Noah and from Jon Stewart, and probably from your show too. Do you think that you have an impact on moving the needle when it comes to changing the minds of folks, or is that really not what the business you're in?
Well, persuasion is one important political action, and I think especially for folks in the center, the idea there's a sort of a fantasy of dialogue and of real rich political conversation, sort of moving the undecided voter from one part of the conversation to another. I think that's really exciting. I've definitely spent a lot of time personally trying to do that in my political life, but that's not the only function of political speech. A lot of what we're doing is critiquing broken frameworks in the media and troubling assertions by the right, dangerous paradigms that are presented by media on the right, and that is valuable even if it's not going to persuade people who are so entrenched in that worldview already.
But what would you say to those who might argue that what shows like yours or Trevor Noah's or any of the comedy shows especially that really primarily tend to focus on making fun of or calling out conservatives. What would you say to those who argue that they are sort of, in a way, the left's alternative to the alt-right's Alex Jones type folks?
I think that's pretty extreme because there's such profound ideology in people like Alex Jones and sites like Breitbart. The ideology is so fixed that the polarization comes from that, in a lot of cases, really quite radical ideology becoming more mainstream. So the argument that it's a real false equivalency to say that people making jokes about a radical right-wing ideology coming into the mainstream are the equivalent of a radical right-wing ideology. I would just reject that paradigm.
But as far as, so when I watch SNL, I would say, I feel as a conservative, I feel like they get me better.
Okay.
Versus Comedy Central.
Sure.
And the thing is, I think Jon Stewart is brilliant. I think Colbert is brilliant. One of my very good friends was the sole conservative on the show. And she would get me, I get to meet him backstage. I think he's brilliant. But I'm just saying, we were talking earlier about representation in the Oscars. I don't feel that I'm represented fairly.
Well, due respect, empathy for conservatives is not the only function of media. And I would say one of the groups of people that our show has the most empathy for are people who, frankly, are being run over by conservative ideology. We're talking about undocumented immigrants. We're talking about people of color. We're talking about LGBTQ communities that are being, overlooked, especially by people like Mike Pence. And we have profound empathy for those communities and advocate for their humanity and critique media that assaults their humanity and frankly, prioritizing in this political moment their humanity over giving you the experience of empathy is.
Would you argue that there is a little bit of a false equivalency between your show and SNL anyway? Because are they different? I mean, SNL is strictly sketch comedy, and yours is a little more satire. Would you?
Yeah, I think ours shows explicitly political satire, whereas SNL sort of does some political satire, and they do other things that aren't political satire. So they're different.
And I mentioned, I'll pose the same question to you. Shonda Rhimes has her on her Instagram profile right now talking about, in her view, she thinks that Christians are not fairly represented in Hollywood, and that there are a number of people who are feeling marginalized, or maybe they have a position on immigration that isn't so extreme.
Sure.
And they have a position about immigration because they're concerned about what's happening at a policy level. And do you risk alienating them by sort of making them into a caricature?
Well, what you're talking about is comfort. And actually, if we roll on in the very clip that you selected, there is often in America a false equivalence between the comfort of people with a lot of privilege and the human rights, frankly, of people that don't have those privileges. And so when I hear arguments like the one you're making, which is effectively that it makes me a little uncomfortable to see someone like me portrayed in the way that I'm being portrayed, I'm definitely sympathetic to that on a personal level, but I'm more sympathetic to the people who don't have the privilege to worry about that kind of discomfort because their lives are in danger.
But when you say rights, I think this is where the nugget is. So like immigration, for example, what's the difference between a citizen versus a non-citizen? And do citizens have special rights that a non-citizen should have?
And that's a totally reasonable conversation we can have, for sure.
Where the temperature gets heated up to say that I don't care about human rights because I believe in an immigration system that's based on merit, that's based on economic policy that is good for citizens, that prioritizes. Because otherwise people get frustrated and they feel like their vote doesn't matter. Because as a citizen, my vote should matter. But if I have a bunch of illegal immigrants coming in, does my vote even matter at that point? Because my tax dollars are going to subsidize illegal immigrants. And so why should I vote? Why should I feel like my vote matters?
What you're talking about is a reasonable policy disagreement on illegal immigration. We can have that conversation, but the premise you introduced was your discomfort as a conservative, about your representation as a conservative.
Do you think John Stewart, let me switch a little bit. John Stewart used to make the argument that his job wasn't to give the news. His job wasn't to change a mind. His job was to be a comedian.
Yeah.
And I think that he got put into this category of being a news person. Trevor Noah gets the same thing, and to some extent, I guess your show gets the similar thing because you're on that same block. That he was a opinion journalist, or he was the equivalent of the Bill O'Reillys and the Sean Hannitys.
Sure.
When his argument was always, listen, that's not my job. I'm not here to change a mind. I'm not here to do anything except for to make you laugh. I mean, would that sort of be essentially what you and Jordan and the rest of those folks at your show feel that your role is?
You know, it's funny. I always felt that answer, the answer that Jon Stewart was just a comedian, was a bit of a political cop-out, because I think he did have a point of view that was a little more political than that sort of line of rhetoric would have one believe. But what I think is inaccurate is to say that we're driving partisanship so much as we're artists. We're reflecting partisanship.
When you sit down to
set
set up the show, do you take the time? I'm assuming you're involved in the rundown every day in the discussion.
Yeah.
Do you take the time to look at what topics you're talking about and what you're hitting, and if there's any parody, or do you simply say, this is what's funny today, this is what we're going to talk about today, regardless of what side it's on?
Yeah, I mean, we spend a tremendous amount of time talking about what our earnest take is on issues, you know, and then as important as that, there are a lot of issues that we think are really important and we should spend a lot of time covering, but we can't find a way to make them funny. We can't find a way to talk about them in the voice of the show. So it's always a balance between.
You think about, I mean, you have to though. I mean, you're on a cable network. You're revenue driven, just like most cable news networks are too. Do you have to think about your audience and say, you know what, this issue may not resonate really well with our audience because they tend to be more left leaning, and so let's kind of steer away from it? Or are you more than happy to say, screw it, this is something that's funny, and if you don't like it, we're going to do it anyway?
I'll be honest, I've never had one conversation at the opposition about the political disposition of our audience. Never one time. We're interested in what's true, we're interested in what's funny, and if we find the marriage of those two things, we run with it. And, you know, people get distressed about different things that we do because of their particular individual political dispositions, but you know, we just do what's true and funny. Yeah.
I mean, I love you. I love Comedy Central. I'm saying, I love satire. I love The Onion. If it's a good joke, I'm going to laugh. But all I'm saying from a business standpoint, as a businesswoman, if you want to expand your business pie, maybe add some more jokes.
As business people there, I think they're set. They're doing pretty well. Let me ask you this before we have to go. Okay. You weren't as involved in politics until you said the Trump administration came into power.
Yeah.
It's changed the way you've looked at comedy. Do you think that politics, even after he's gone, do you think that after this administration is gone that you'll stay in politics? I mean, is it a new passion for you as far as your comedy goes, as far as your work goes, or do you think it's just a momentary thing because of the nature of the country right now?
I mean, we'll see. I think there's a rhetorical assault on what it means to be an American in this moment, and I feel like people like the president have hijacked a definition of Americanness that's not particularly inclusive, that's not particularly warm, that's not particularly kind, and I contest that definition as an American. I have as much right to define what it means to be an American as people in power right now. So I feel like I'm going to stay in political satire until I feel like we've wrested that definition back.
Oh, Lord.
So
well, you'll be in it for the rest of your life.
Might be.
Kobi, Libii, thank you very much for joining us.
Come back anytime.
Yes,
I love to keep
you can catch
I love
the
to keep
opposition
Thanks so much for having me. I appreciate
with
it,
Jordan
guys.
Klepper
Yeah.
and with Kobi on Comedy Central. Weeknights, Monday through Thursday at
11:30.
11:30, not 10:30. Okay, 10:30 Central if you're in Central. Kobi,
Middle
thank
America.
you much for joining us.
Thanks,
Appreciate
guys.
it.
Appreciate it.
They watch it too. I
They
have
do
no
watch
doubt.
it.
I have no doubt. You gave him a run for his money there, girl. You pushed him hard. He may
He
not
brought
come
it
back
back.
again.
He brought it back. He was smart, and I liked what he had to say.
Okay, our next
Yeah.
guest you've been excited about for
I'm
a week.
so excited. Yes, because I think Malcolm X. I loved his biography, and if you all haven't read it, you got to read it. It's a story of redemption. I'm not saying I agree with everything that he did or was, but the autobiography is just really, really compelling, and I just fell in love with his story and his family. And so I'm so glad that we have for our Bookster segment, as you all know who watch the show, Bookster is a website for book lovers and so much more. And today we have the author and educator, Ilyasah Shabazz, who is the daughter of Malcolm X. Ilyasah, I'm sorry about that. My apologies. Ilyasah.
Our phonetic spellings and our teleprompter
it was my
are
reading.
always
No,
horrible.
The spelling was good. It was I read it wrong. Ilyasah. And she's also out with a new book, Betty Before X. And it follows her mother's life from childhood to civil rights leader. It's partially fictionalized, but it comes from real stories from Betty's friends and family. So thank you so much, Ilyasah, for joining us.
It's a pleasure. I'm happy
thrilled.
to be here, and I'm actually happy to see Mr. Clay Aiken in
gosh.
person because I was rooting for you. And
Oh, thank you. Wait, which Tom? I lost them both. Wait, I lost all three. I have a feeling you didn't watch The Apprentice.
oh no, I wasn't talking about The
right.
Apprentice. I was talking about American Idol.
I have no problem saying I lost that one. I'm fine with that. I wear that as a badge of honor. Why? What made you feel like you wanted to write this?
Well, I wanted to make sure that my parents were put in proper context because people say, oh, Malcolm, he was so controversial, redemption, all these things. And, it wasn't. We forget the social climate that existed. And I think we're talking about it more now with, the Me Too movement, with Black Lives Matter, with all of these, the Muslim ban, we're coming to understand the social climate that existed for many people. And so for my mother, she gave her daughters so much love. And, it's kind of funny, like when I went to college and stuff, people had these expectations of who, I would be or my sisters, depending on who they thought Malcolm was. And not realizing that Malcolm was a man of love, compassion, peace. He fought against injustice. And he sacrificed his life for that. And so my mother, I often wondered, who was this woman that gave him this compassion and helped him when, he came home? And it was this woman who gave her 6 daughters, love, 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 love. And what kinds of values went into her at that young age.
So, and in terms of the book, so it's a combination sort of hybrid of fiction and nonfiction. Talk about that process. How did you interweave fiction and nonfiction, and why did you present it that way?
Well, I think first it's important for children to open a story and see a reflection of themselves in a positive manner. And then also to be able to go along with her challenges, her trepidations, her questions about herself, about people around her, about the community, and doing something about it, being responsible and caring and loving. And so, I wanted to make sure that we could present historical truths and fun, excitement, music, that all girls at a certain age, they like boys, at a certain age, they like music and dancing, they like to fix their hair, they like to wear dresses. And then there are also those challenging times. And we find Betty, who does become a historical figure, who is the wife of Malcolm X, that, she has challenges like any other child.
What misconceptions did you feel were most important to sort of change people's view on?
Well, I think taking into consideration the social challenges, that many times when we talk about people like Malcolm X, Dr. King, Maya Angelou, people, from the 40s, 50s, 60s, even the 1800s, that we forget about the social climate, how challenging it had to have been, and that these people lent their work to the many movements of today. And so young people today can see that young people, you know, their parents, their grandparents had similar challenges as them.
Humanization that people have not really given them.
I find that so interesting, especially with the debate around issues of history. So like Winston Churchill, for example. Gary Oldman just won the Oscar for his portrayal of Winston Churchill. And for a lot of people, he's a controversial figure because he supported colonizing India. But what he also did was he defeated the Nazis. So he was a person who was a human being like everyone else. So how, and so again, like I said, you know, as a conservative, talking about Malcolm X and seeing some of his early speeches, they were, in many respects, very, very controversial. So how should we think about sort of just the human aspect of that experience as it relates to the historical context? I find it very interesting.
Well, I mean, come on. When you think about it, my father had a profound reaction to any injustice against any human being, for anyone to be discriminated against. And so we forget that was the time of lynching. You know, there was the reason for blacks leaving the South and coming to the North weren't for jobs. It was an exodus. They were fleeing trauma and terror of lynching. Lynching was so prevalent. And, you know, just thinking about all of the challenges that existed then. But I don't think that, you know, my father was not controversial. My father challenged injustice head on. And had we listened then, we might not be experiencing the same exact things that we did 50 years ago with these marches of young people, you know, talking about their rights, talking about other people's dignities and all of the things that are entitled to every human being.
Okay, so this may be an easy question, also may be hard, who knows. Your parents' views, as you think they would be, on how we should handle America today, like the lot of the injustices that they fought against, right back on the forefront again, with arguably a less conciliatory administration. What lessons should Americans take from? I went that phone. What lessons should Americans take from the work of your father to help combat some of the injustices today? How should it be done in similar ways? Are differences? What should people take? What lessons should they take from your mother and your father?
Well, I think just being honest and you know, about the issues that people are challenged. You know, if we sit down at a table and look at these injustice issues, why are gay people discriminated against? Why are black people discriminated against? Why are we told that Mexicans are rapists and drug dealers? Why are we told that African Americans are these things? And recognize the humanity in all of us. You know, instead of imposing, inferiority, superiority, all these false notions of being superior to the other, instead of just acknowledging that we're all human beings. I mean, it seems corny, but it's really the answer to it all.
Empathy is lacking in some ways, right?
Compassion, care. It's not an issue of black, white, straight, gay, Muslim, Christian. It's an issue of right and wrong. You know, and we all know that there are injustices. And if we do nothing about it, what does it say about our individual values?
Now, one thing we haven't really touched on, this is a book that, I mean, you've touched on a little bit, we haven't touched on, but this is a book that you wrote in large part geared a little bit towards children to read as well.
Yes.
Why did you want to focus it on kids? Is it because your memories as a child are stronger for your mother, or what made you feel like that was important to do?
No, I think it's important to get young people at a young age to be compassionate. You know, that it really, I mean, what is this black and white thing, you know? That if you see someone challenged by anything, that we would want our children to have a reaction to it, and that we would want our children to right the wrongs in society at a young age, instead of, you know, when we're older and, you know, we've already, you know, been influenced, you know, in some kind of way. But I think it's best to get children when they're young. And, you know, they're just so beautiful. You know, I've had so many just warm, wonderful reactions from children who, you know, have feeling about people being treated unfairly, and they don't see black and white.
You didn't know about your father's activism, though, till you were in college more. You didn't know as much about what he had done until you were in college. So your mother shaped your views on the world based on her views on the world and what you were living in at the moment. You didn't know too much about that. How did that change your...
Yeah, that's true. Well, you know, my mother raised us, you know, we were there when our father was gunned down. So she wanted us to know that our father didn't leave us, that our father loved us. I was very young, and I'm very grateful. And so my mother, kept our father's presence in our home. And we knew that our father was loving. We knew that he had a beautiful butterfly collection that we had, encased in this mahogany wood. My father was really a wonderful human being. And the play there was a Betty production play that captured what Malcolm was like when he came home. He wasn't walking around angry. He reacted to injustices, and that's what we forget, putting him in proper context. So when he came home, he was loving. He was lonely because of the work that he was doing. He was young. He was only in his 20s when the world learned of him. And he was 39 when he was killed. And to have made such an impact around the world at such a young age speaks, to his integrity. It speaks to, to the person that he was. Remember, when you see Malcolm usually giving speeches, he is reacting to the social injustices of that time. And when you see him, for example, in England at Oxford University, reciting "To be or not to be, whether it's noble in mind to suffer slings and arrows of outrageous fortune or to take arms against a sea of troubles." He is a brilliant man. He reads, but he wants to inspire young people to be compassionate about injustice against anyone.
Right. Well, in terms of your mother, so the story is Betty before X. As you were thinking about your mom to write the book, do you think she had any idea of how her life would change and who she would end up with? I mean, because I always find it interesting, that movie, Slumdog Millionaire, where it's all about serendipity. Do you think there are things in your mom's early life that sort of set her up to be in that place to meet your father?
Yeah, I think destiny is really amazing, and I think it's amazing. It's wonderful. My mother was, she grew up in the church. She, grew up very responsible young lady, compassionate activist. And I think that later on in life, when you get to see Malcolm and Betty as adults, then you realize, okay, this is why Malcolm chose Betty to be his wife. Because of her compassion, because of her spirituality, because, of her caring nature.
Oh God, I don't want to stop.
I know. I have so many questions.
And we love, and they, I'm sure they're loving the fact that they can, because they're going to get the book. I don't always want to steal books when people are here, but I'm going to steal that one, and I'm going to have you sign it for my son.
Absolutely.
Because I think that's something that I want him to read and know. Betty before X. We got a loyal audience that buys these.
Okay.
So they will. You can find it on Bookster, you can find it on Amazon, you can find it wherever books are sold.
And I have to tell you that in less than 30 days of its release, it went into its second print. And I did this book with Renee Watson, who's a phenomenal novelist.
Well, I'm looking forward to it. I'm going to read it before he does. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, Clay. Thank you.
Thank
you so much.
Okay. Thanks. And thank you so much. We've run over, but we appreciate you being here. Stay tuned. Coming up at 12 o'clock for Bold Life. Don't miss it. And as always, Bold Business Tuesdays at 9 a.m. Don't forget, if you like the show, keep the conversation going, share it with your friends, and we'll see you soon.
See you Friday.